All right. Well, welcome today to the Christmas Beetle Count Ask Me Anything session, where Tanya and I are here just to chat to you about Christmas beetles and help you problem solve or answer the burning questions you have about Christmas beetles. I'm Associate Professor Kate Umbers at Western Sydney University and the Managing Director of Invertebrates Australia. And I'm coming to you today from Darug country, and I want to acknowledge the persisting connection that the Indigenous people have in this area, and that their sovereignty was never ceded. Tanya, would you like to introduce yourself? So I'm sure that Tanya probably needs no introduction to people that are fans of the Christmas Beetle Count, but I'll hand over to you to give your introduction as well.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Associate Professor Tanya Lottie from the University of Sydney. I'm coming at you from Gadigal land, and as Kate said, I also want to acknowledge the connection that Indigenous people have, particularly when we're talking about something like Christmas beetles, which are this amazing culturally significant insect that's been doing really interesting things. Um, I am an invertebrate ecologist, so I study invertebrates and the ways that they interact with each other and with the world around them. And so the Christmas beetle count is part of that. I am the outreach lead for Invertebrates Australia, and the Christmas Beetle Project is one of our big flagship projects to try to figure out what's going on with the Christmas beetles. Yeah, so that's me.
Thanks, Tanya. So the way we're going to work it today is, as you know, when you registered for the webinar, there was an opportunity to say, what question would you like to ask? And so we've got those. I've got these here next to me on a separate screen where I've got them color-coded and reorganized in the hopes that we can make sure we cover at least the main themes that you guys are interested in, if not all the actual questions. And we're happy for you to pop questions into the little Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And it's a little bit of a mental juggling act to be thinking of the questions, answering the questions, monitoring the questions, but we're going to do the best we can to try to get to some of the questions that you're asking in real time, as well as the ones that you asked when you registered for the webinar. All right, so it seems appropriate to start off with I guess, the reason why this whole thing is happening anyway. A few people had questions around what's causing the decline, why have they disappeared? What do we know, Tanya, about that? Where are the knowledge gaps? And yeah, what can we say so far? So, whatever parts of that you'd like to jump in and have a go at. And I'll try
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so I think we'll even take a step back and ask, are Christmas beetles in decline? Because that's the question we hear year after year. Like, is there something going on with Christmas beetle populations? And it's a really difficult question to answer because there are 36 different species of Christmas beetles and they occur in different parts of the country. So it's entirely possible that you could have one species that's doing just fine whilst another is in a catastrophic decline or has gone extinct. It's not one insect that we're talking about. The other part of this, and this might surprise a lot of people, is that we don't have long-term monitoring of almost any insect in the country. Like, it's very rare that we have long-term numbers. The Christmas beetles are no exception. And so we don't actually know what a normal number of Christmas beetles would even be. Nobody was keeping track over a long period of time, which is what we would normally need to be able to say as a scientist that an animal is in decline. I would want to be able to look back through studies that have gone back for years and years and years showing that decline, and we don't have that. What we do have is a mountain of anecdotal evidence where almost everyone I speak to will say, hey, remember when I was young, there were millions of Christmas beetles, and this was part of the holiday season, and I haven't seen many recently. What's going on? If one or two people were saying that, I'd say, well, memory's fallible. Maybe you're misremembering. Things always seem bigger and more exciting when we're kids than when we're adults. But this just seems to be such a consistent memory that it makes me worry that something is going on. I remember when I arrived in Sydney about 17 years ago, I arrived in November. And when I tell people that I was here to study insects, people would tell me about the Christmas beetles and say, you're going to love it here. There's going to be this huge number of beetles. It's going to be great. And to this day, I've never seen large numbers of Christmas beetles. I've seen one or two here and there, but certainly not the swarms that people describe. We've gone through and looked at historical data, newspaper reports from the early 1900s, 1930s, 40s, and it really really seem to be like people write about swarms of Christmas beetles like it was just a regular thing. And then as you look into like the 80s, 90s, and now, from then on, the media reports really change character from like, oh, there were lots of swarms, plagues of Christmas beetles again, to much more like, oh, where are the Christmas beetles? Where have they gone? Has anybody seen them? So with that in mind, I can't say as a scientist that, Christmas beetles are definitely in decline because we don't have the data, but I would bet huge money that Christmas beetles, most species of Christmas beetles, are probably in decline. So, with that in mind, we would like to know if they're in trouble, what's causing the problem. And again, until we started the Christmas beetle count, there wasn't enough data to really even start to answer that question. Um, we now have enough data for about half the species to start doing modeling where we look we use statistics to kind of look at where Christmas beetles are and what drives that distribution. So what factors might be contributing to where they're found. So again, it's not decline, it's looking at current populations and what's driving their locations. And one of the things that's starting to pop out for many species is that urbanization is linked to there being not Christmas beetles. So urban areas tend to have fewer species of Christmas beetles than non-urban areas. And many of the species kind of ping up as urbanization is an issue. Now, we don't know what specific part of urbanization is causing that. It could be loss of habitat, which is where I would put my money. It could be things like the urban heat island effect. It could be changes to the soil because Christmas beetle larvae need to live in the soil. So when you have lots of asphalt and these impervious surfaces, that might be not great for the larvae. So that's pinging out. But what's interesting is that for a few species, we actually see the opposite pattern. They're more common in cities than they are outside of cities. So yeah, that's
Right.
nature for you.
Hard.
It's hard.
It's
But
real hard.
it is, but it really brought home for me that we can't treat Christmas beetles as one entity. They're not one thing, they're individual species, and each of those species has its own needs and its own requirements. And a few of them are perfectly happily living in cities, many of them are not. So we kind of have to think about how we manage them individually and not as a group.
Yeah, it's yeah, very comprehensive answer. And I think it's interestingly, not to deviate too much from Christmas beetles, but this is kind of the same story for pretty well all insects in Australia, right? Not that they're all not that we all think they're necessarily in decline, but that we don't have the background data to be able to say things with a lot of scientific confidence. And so we're trying to do all kinds of different sort of styles of approaches to piece the puzzle together and figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess to follow on that, I think the fact that we don't have those numbers actually has real consequences to the funding for these types of projects. Because if you can't even demonstrate that there is a decline to a high scientific standard, then it's really hard to ask for money to help protect these animals because we can't even prove that they need protecting. And so we get into this really awkward situation where we're kind of doing the best we can, but we don't get the sort of funding that you do for koalas or platypus or for any vertebrate where we can say, yes, these are the numbers and here's where the problems are. So we're really starting on the back foot.
Yeah, and the solution is we need the data. Yeah. So, I mean, and this is the thing, right? It's like, well, for some species, that are big and colorful and people like them and they're easy to photograph and they come to visit our houses rather than having to go out into, remote areas of the bush to find these things. Citizen scientists, community scientists can make seriously huge contributions to conservation in Australia.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And that's where I think the citizen science, I think, has the potential to help us with a lot of these problems in a way that's only been possible really in the last, 5 to 10 years.
yeah.
Before that, the technology, I'd say, wasn't really there. And one of the issues you have with sort of community science is that we still need to have high quality data that we can actually use. And that's really why we've been really asking people to submit photos through the iNaturalist platform, because that allows us to have verifiable location. So we know exactly where that photo was taken. Because we have a photo, we can say, yes, we know what species this is. And it allows us to collect huge amounts of data, much more than we would ever be able to collect, or even screen if people were, say, emailing us photographs. That would be a huge challenge. But this platform allows us to really streamline a lot of that.
So I'm just going to pop the link into, I don't actually know where to put it. Let's just tell everybody that you could go to inaturalist.org.
Mm.
And most of you may already know about this, but if you don't, it's just be aware that like you'll never look at the outside of the world the same way again because it's so exciting. Because, well, look, this I wonder what lady beetle that is. I'll take a photo of it. It's iNaturalist, and oh look, it's a punctate lady beetle or whatever. And the whole world of natural history opens up for you because it's a way for you to get a name on something, which helps you then figure out more about it. So it's an incredibly cool nonprofit organization started in the US, is used globally. There's an app and a website, and it's just amazing. And I mean, we all use it like kind of, all the time.
Yep.
Epic bug nerds.
And we should say that iNaturalist works for any living thing. So even if
Yeah.
plants are your thing or birds or whatever, you can
Indeed.
upload any living thing.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, it runs a machine learning algorithm that will try to identify your sighting. So for some groups, it's better than others, but because there have been so many Christmas beetle sightings and because it learns, it's gotten very, very good at knowing when you're looking at a Christmas beetle versus something else. So it'll tell you, yes, it's this Christmas beetle. Once things get uploaded, we have an awesome team of great volunteers who go through those sightings and will help correct identifications or, tell you if you've got something really rare. And it is super. I think the cool thing about it for me and looking at insects is that you can make discoveries just in your backyard or while you're on vacation. We've since the Christmas Beetle Count project started, we've had seven beetle species that hadn't been seen in decades that were rediscovered by people in their backyards or out on a walk. And they would submit those going, oh, I think it's this species, but I'm not sure. And our volunteers would be like, it's actually this one beetle that no one's seen since 1970, and we thought was extinct, and now here it is. And that's amazing.
It's,
Um, it's really exciting. I mean, I've been on vacation taking a picture of a little bee fly that I thought looked cool, but didn't look like anything super special. And within hours, people from the museum were on there saying, "Oh, this is the first live photo of this animal. We've never had. No one's seen it alive. The only thing they have for it is a dead specimen." So taking those photos is really, yeah, really powerful. There's also lots of other data we can get from that. So we have been looking at what the beetles are feeding on, so we can get a better idea of what their preferred plants are. And we can do that if someone takes a picture of a beetle, gnawing down on something, that's data. We know more about what that species needs than we did before. So
yeah.
I can't overstate how much of a difference those sightings make, not just of Christmas beetles, but of biodiversity more generally.
Yeah, absolutely everything. So, so what we might move on to is talking about the life cycle. You just touched a little bit on plants and things like that. So, we've got a few questions around how long does an adult beetle live? What are their favorite plants? What trees and environments do they like? So, kind of habitat related questions. Are they pollinators? And then a really cool one, how do we like create habitat for them? What can we do that they to give them what they need? So those questions are kind of around a bit more about the biology of Christmas beetles. Could you give us a little bit more detail there, Danielle?
Yeah, so Christmas beetles in general, again, there's 36 species of them. They belong to the genus or group Anoplognathus, although we have also included the genuses Repsimus and Coludes because our taxonomy friends say that they probably all should be one group, and they probably will
Scientific
be one
names.
day.
Scientific
Yeah.
names so easy to say, to remember.
It's super easy, right? So that's what a Christmas beetle is. Unless I have to say, if any of you are coming in from Tasmania or parts of Victoria, we do acknowledge that Christmas beetle in some parts of the country actually refers to a different insect called a golden stag beetle in mainland Australia, Lamprima orata. It is a gloriously beautiful beetle that comes in like shimmering purples and greens and blues, but it is not the beetle that we're studying for this particular project. So that's a different insect that just happens to have the common name Christmas beetle. We're referring again to Anoplognathus, Coludes, and Repsimus. Those are the groups that we call Christmas beetles. Um, their life cycle, so the adults, well, if we start from the egg is laid into the soil, into the ground, and it hatches out into a larva, a grub. If you've ever seen a curl grub, that's what they look like. So curl grubs, those kind of white to cream colored larvae that live in the soil, they're quite chunky and fat, and they've got this sort of orangish to brownish colored head that's usually quite distinct and six kind of very clear legs. We find them often in gardens and things. And those are the larvae of scarab beetles, which is the bigger group that Christmas beetles belong to. So when you pull one of those out of your garden, it's really hard to tell which species of
Give
beetle
me
you're
a.
looking at. Could be any of them. I can't do it by eye. I need like a magnifying glass and a lot of time and a cool drink because it's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
It's super
Cool,
frustrating.
cool drink.
It's just like, what even are you? So it's really hard to know which one you have. But that's what the larvae look like. What are they doing in the soil? We know that they're tunneling around, which is great for aerating the soil. They're mixing up the organic matter, but as for what they eat, we don't actually know. So there was a tiny bit of Christmas beetle research that was done mostly in sort of the before the 1980s, maybe a little bit into the 90s, where they were looking at what Christmas beetles larvae ate. Some people seem to think they gnaw on the roots of plants. Others suggested that they were feeding on the organic matter in the soil. There weren't really any good studies to really get that question answered. And again, there's 36 different species. They're not all necessarily feeding on the same thing. So we know they're in the soil. They're eating something. Could be roots, could be organic matter, could be a mixture of those two things.
Yep.
They'll do that for about a year to 2 years, depending on the species and the conditions. We know that at least one species, if it gets to be quite dry, they can slow their growth and almost go into a resting state, kind of like hibernation, but for the warmer weather. So estivation is what we call it. And they can rest like that for a few months, and then continue growing. So the larval stage lasts between a year
Their
to 2 years.
legs. Because it
Sorry?
just like this with their little legs like way up like this.
That would be so cute with a little pillow of soil for them to just rest here.
Sorry, sorry, I
to, sl-
interrupted, but it was very cute. Please do.
to sleep away the bad conditions. And then what'll happen is they make a pupa. So again, kind of like what a caterpillar does, they go into this pupa form. The larvae turns into goo, sort of a larval soup, and its body rearranges completely into the adult form, which will then claw its way up to the surface and start flying around. At that point, as an adult, it needs to eat, mate, and lay eggs. And that's really the only three things adult Christmas beetles are thinking about. They feed on, we think, mostly eucalypt leaves. So there's good reports of them being in large numbers on eucalypts. You'll often see them in clusters on eucalyptus trees. Some species have more of a tendency to form groups. And when they do that, sometimes they can eat all the leaves off of the tree. So you'll see historic reports where they would just strip trees down. There'd be so many of them on eucalypt trees, which almost always recover the next years. Trees are very good at handling being gnawed on. Um, so they'll do that for around a month to 2 months. We don't actually know exactly how long the adult period lasts. Um, they could probably go longer in captivity, but in the wild, they're getting eaten by everything. I mean, they're just flying balls of protein and fat. They can't really defend themselves. So birds, reptiles, mammals, everybody's trying to eat them. I don't know if you've ever seen one fly. They are not graceful. They're very clumsy animals, so they're also hitting things and falling to the ground. And my guess would be that adults probably don't live more than a couple of weeks to a month, although they could probably go longer if in perfect conditions.
Yeah.
Um,
Fantastic. That covers everything, I guess, except for like what can we do to help them
yeah,
in our gardens? And you were saying urban areas, some of them are doing really poorly. Is there something we can do to help promote looking after them there?
yeah. So I guess on the one hand, we're still collecting information so that we'd be able to tell you here are the exact things you need to plant. We don't really know that yet, but what we can say is we know they need gum trees. So our gum trees are great. Planting gum trees provides a food source not only for the Christmas beetles, but for so many other animals. I mean, flower, once a gum tree goes into flower, there are just so many species of beetle and pollinator and everything that will hang around them. So if you can, planting gum trees is great. Not all of us have the space to do that, which is fine. I would strongly recommend against using insecticides in your garden. And that's because we know that at least two of the species, we've had reports of them living in garden beds and coming out of garden beds. And so we know that at least some species are perfectly happy to be in garden soil. And that means that if you put in one of the chemicals that's targeted against other types of curl grubs, it will kill them as well. And that includes products that are labeled as eco or organic or any of that. That
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. What matters is that they're targeted against curl grubs. And that also goes for any broad spectrum insecticide, which is the vast majority of them. So most of the time, if you're putting an insecticide on or in your garden, there's a chance it's going to impact not only the Christmas beetles, but lots of other insects that might be living in the soil. So avoiding insecticides wherever you can is really important. Also planting, again, we're not exactly sure what the larvae are eating, but we don't think it hurts to plant lots of native grasses if you can. Again, it's not only the Christmas beetles, but lots of our native butterflies and other native beetle species we know feed on native grasses. So having those there provides roots for the larvae, we think. Although again, we're still working on trying to figure that out. But worst case, you've provided wonderful habitat for other insects. So it's kind of a no-lose situation.
Fantastic. And again, folks, if you have questions popping up in your mind that you'd like to ask, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. So if you like wiggle your mouse around on the Zoom screen where Tanya and I are, down the bottom, there's a little box with a question mark in it with little letters Q&A underneath. Can jump in there and ask some questions, and I'll try to get to them while I'm also getting to the questions that you had when you first registered. All right, so let's move on to I think the natural next question might be the timing of when Christmas beetles are around. You mentioned it, how long they live, but I guess there's a couple of other questions about, I think this might be, people might be thinking a little bit about how cicadas kind of have these, like they skip years and things.
Yep.
Do we see like big and small years for Christmas beetles in some kind of like predictable way, or is it just something else? And roughly like when we start seeing them in the year.
Yeah, so we usually start seeing Christmas beetles around November, and then it kind of peaks right about now in mid-December. And then we see them into January, and then by February, they're mostly gone. Last year, we had one coming out. We had our first sighting in mid-October, which was really, really early. We don't know if that's a trend that they're going to be coming out earlier as the temperatures get warmer or what, so we'll keep an eye on that. Yeah, sorry, I missed this. What was the second part?
About so I was asking about how long before Christmas can we see them, so you answered that.
Yep.
And about the are they sort of like a 7-year period
Yeah.
kind of situation going on, or is it
Yeah, so as far as we know, they're not that kind of situation where cicada nymphs will take, say, 7 years to develop. Depending on the species, they have different developmental times. And because of that, you get this synchronicity where you'll get a huge brood that all mature at the same time, and then you get a big cicada year, and then it goes down. Christmas beetles seem to take between 1 to 2 years, so you don't really get this big synchronous emergence. That doesn't mean that we won't have big years and small years. We're just starting to get enough data to start looking at, even what is a normal Christmas beetle year now and what sort of numbers. My feeling, some of the reports we're getting from this year is that this might be a pretty good Christmas beetle year. Again, with the caveat that it's probably not anywhere like it used to be, but compared to last year or the year before, we seem to be getting a lot more sightings and lots more reports of large numbers of Christmas beetles. Whereas before we would get, one or two. We've had lots of people comment that they've seen, thousands of them at once. So it may be a better year, but that's probably not driven by difference in the developmental time. My guess would be that that's more driven by the weather conditions and climatic conditions. And so we've kind of got a bit of a Goldilocks year this year where it hasn't been years of drought because, of course, the larvae are in the soil. So if we get drought for a prolonged period of time, they die. They just dry out in the soil, and that's the end of it for them. But on the flip side, if we get many, many years of rain like we had a few years ago, the soil is waterlogged and the larvae can essentially drown in the soil. This year has kind of been, enough water that the soil is relatively moist, but not so much water that it's waterlogged. And again, not speaking for the whole country, mostly for Sydney. I don't know exactly what the climatic conditions have been everywhere else. But at least here it's been almost perfect, I think. So hopefully we get a good emergence this year.
Yeah, it is worth mentioning that Tanya and I are both based in Sydney, or I'm closer to the Blue Mountains, but relatively speaking, and it is wildly different. So there are species of Christmas beetles found, like there's at least one species of Christmas beetle found in every state and territory across the country. But we can often be doing that East Coast thing. Sorry, folks. And I just want to point out, so Trish had a great question around like whether the bushfire season, heats the soil up and stuff like that. I think you kind of just answered that yeah, like the soil, the conditions in the upper layer of the soil, whether it be waterlogging or really, really super hot, can have a big impact on.
Yeah, that's right. As far as whether bushfires specifically can have an impact, we don't really know because a lot of the heating of the soil is in the upper layers, but soil's relatively well insulated. So
Yeah.
in theory, if they can go down deep enough, they'd be okay. Whether they do or not, and which level of the soil they're spending most of their time, and we don't really know. So it's tricky.
Excellent. All right. Well, so we just started talking a little bit about where Christmas beetles are. And we did have a couple of specific questions on the distribution. Um, a couple of interesting ones are what we call Australia, Christmas beetle in Australia, i.e. those three genera. So let me see if I can get them right. Repsimus, Calodes, and Anaplognathus. Yes, pay
Congratulations.
attention. Daniel and I had like a tutorial at the Australian Museum a couple of years ago from the expert, the taxonomic expert in this area, and yeah, he was laughing at least at me quite a lot. Turns out my drawings from undergrad are not, they haven't improved much from my scientific drawings. Yeah, so are all the Christmas beetles that we call in Australia found anywhere else in the world? So any of those genera found anywhere else in the world, or are we the custodians of all of them? Do we know the answer to top of our
I
heads?
don't know for Calodes and Repsimus. For Anaplognathus, there's one species that I believe is found, I want to say in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah,
I think, but that's it. All the others are only found in Australia. And I suspect both of the Calodes and Repsimus are also only found in Australia.
yeah.
So, I mean, the vast majority are only here.
And the vast majority of insects that you find in Australia, you only find in Australia, right? It's not just Christmas beetles, like a huge proportion of the insects that we have in Australia are only found here. Are you Googling that as quickly as you can, Tanya?
I was actually going to say to everybody, if you ever have this kind of question, you can go to iNaturalist, which is exactly what I'm doing now,
Yeah,
and look at the distributions of things. So it's really handy when you have these sorts of questions. And
yeah,
so for Repsimus, it looks like it's only in Australia. There's one strange point in Mexico, but that could be a mistake.
yeah.
Often you get things that are put in accidentally, or they're not quite right, or they're just a case where something happened to get there. Um, and then for Calodes, uh, yeah, they seem to be just in Australia as well. So that's right. So there's just the one species then of Anaplognathus that's elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. So with the custodians, it's up to us to look after them. No one else is going to do it. Um, yeah, I think we've answered the question as well. Are all Christmas beetles native? But do you want to just maybe spend a little bit of time kind of unpacking the difference there and like the subtleties in the difference between when we ask a Christmas beetle found anywhere else versus are all Christmas beetles native? Like how those questions are different, how they're the same. Do you know what I mean? Or am I just like confusing the issue here?
You mean
Maybe
like endemic versus
kind of,
not?
yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay. So when an critter or plant or whatever is only found in sort of one place, we usually say it's endemic to that place. So the Christmas beetles are mostly only found in Australia, but within that group, they're found in different, their distributions are different throughout the country. So I think there are 21 species of Christmas beetle in New South Wales. I think there's one in Tasmania. I want to say one or two in Western Australia, one in Northern Territory, and I can't remember. Queensland has the bulk of the species. So yeah. Queensland is like magical Christmas beetle land. And I have to say, some of the prettiest species are only found up north in northern Queensland. The Anaplognathus aureus, which looks like it's made out of gold, is only found in far north Queensland. And Smardinius, which is this, it's green, but it's almost this kind of green that you can't look at properly because it's so iridescent and shimmery. It's the this looking beetle. That's also found northern Queensland. So depending on where you are in the country, you will have different beetles there. And that might be different from other parts of the country.
So Tanya and I were recently in far north Queensland at a really cool bug nerd meeting, and that's like that's a dichotomy. That's like, can you have a really cool bug nerd meeting? I feel like
Cool. We're totally cool.
And yeah, and I was there with my family for a few days before, and we saw one of the little green ones in the Daintree, but it was in the
Right.
Daintree, and so obviously we I took a photo, put on iNaturalist. You can go and find my photo. Of course, we left it there, living happily in those absolutely amazing ancient rainforest there. Great. All right. And so there was a very specific question about which Christmas beetles should still be in the Blue Mountains, and I feel like I should, I should be living there. I should probably know the answer to that question. I don't actually know the full list of species that should be found in the Blue Mountains, but again, I feel like Tanya's direction towards I'm naturalist, but I also you'll see in the Q&A answers, I've also directed Alan towards a website called the Atlas of Living Australia, which is also a super cool, totally free, open resource that it takes, not only does it take iNaturalist data, but it also compiles like data that has been digitized from various museums around the country and all kinds of amazing places, and pulls all of those data into one central repository, and does very clever things like make sure that if there's threatened species that are very highly prized in the illegal trade or something like that, those data points are like sort of blurred so that they're like at least 100 kilometers off in an unknown direction and those sorts of things. So it's a really amazing resource that's totally fine for everybody to look at. And that will give you like endless information about any species you want. And it's really, really fun to spend hours on as well. Who needs Facebook and Instagram, TikTok?
Right. And
You get all the time on this stuff. So yeah, so if you go into the Atlas of Living Australia or you go into iNaturalist and you can zoom into these maps like in great, great, great detail, and you can click on points and see what's there.
yeah.
But yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say we should also say that iNaturalist and the Atlas of Living Australia talk to each other. So once a sighting in iNaturalist reaches the research grade, so people agree on what the identification is, and if it's a clear picture, then that information gets pushed into the Atlas of Living Australia as well. So the sightings that you see on iNaturalist eventually become part of that permanent biodiversity repository for Australia. And then the Atlas of Living Australia pushes on to something called the Global Biodiversity IF Inventory
Information,
Facility, Information Facility. That's it.
the GBIF, as we
Yeah,
call
the
it.
GBIF. And GBIF is like the global version of that. So it has all the biodiversity information we can collect for the whole planet. So for those of you that are data nerds, these are really exciting things because you have access to all of this information that I will never be able to go and sample Christmas beetles across the country. I mean, I would love to. I would love that so much. Realistically, don't have the funding to do that, but I can go on these resources and say, oh, this species is only found here. We can crunch that data. We can start to look again at threats, what's controlling those distributions. And hopefully over time, we'll be able to look at more patterns in those. So it's really cool. It's a cool time if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then for the Blue Mountains question, I did do some pre-work for this, and I
Be
do know which species are in the Blue Mountains. So there's 8 species that we have on the iNaturalist project. The most commonly observed one is Anoplognathus iridotarsus, which sadly doesn't have a common name. It is a beautiful Christmas beetle.
We give it a name. Let's just choose it now.
We
Your
should,
choices in the Q&A. What do you want to call
because it
it?
needs a better name than Anoplognathus iridotarsus, which is a mouthful. The second most commonly observed one is the Anoplognathus porosus, which overall is the most commonly observed Christmas beetle, not just in the Blue Mountains, but across the country. It's also the species we were talking about that is more likely to be found in urban areas. So it seems to be one that's relatively adjusted to living with people, although again, I suspect its numbers are probably far below what they used to be. But it's doing okay. Its common name is inexplicably the washerwoman.
Which I love. How cool is it?
Yeah, don't know where that comes from. That one is
Cool. It's weird. Like
deeply
reminds
weird.
me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and like
The washerwoman.
pushing with that giant fork.
The other species are the brown-winged Christmas beetle, Flavipennis, the campfire beetle, which is adorable. It's like a brown and white speckly one. The emerald tip beetle, which has a bright green butt. It is amazing when you see it. The king Christmas beetle, which is viridianus, which is huge and like almost goldish with sort of brownish undertones, really pretty beetle. That's what we're particularly concerned about because it seems like the records from the past have these as being very, very common in Sydney and the Blue Mountains, and that doesn't seem to happen. Like I've never seen any in our sampling.
What was it called again?
The king Christmas beetle, so Edelplugnathus viridianus.
Right, 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 right. Yeah,
Yep,
okay.
yep. And then the cashew beetle, Politicus, and Anoplognathus rugosus, which you only have one observation, but I actually know the person who made that observation because it was one of my honors students.
Mm.
And it was the first female rugosus that had been seen. So that was very exciting for her when she found that one.
Well done. You get so many, many, many marks. A very like A plus plus plus. Excellent. All right. So it actually leads us really nicely into our next set of questions. But before we go there, I saw a really nice question, which was from Sandra, which is, are there any extinct Christmas beetles? Now, we had this incredible paper come out in the last couple of weeks from some of our colleagues estimating that 9,000 invertebrate species have gone extinct in Australia since colonization, so the late 1700s, which is, as opposed to 100 recognized extinctions. Like we recognize 100 species have gone extinct in Australia. We know of 100 species, we know they've gone extinct. This was obviously a model, a computer modeled study, by way of the fact that they're no longer around, we don't know. But this is kind of taking into account all kinds of background rates and things. Very alarming, but also actually not that unexpected, which is pretty wild. When you're working in this kind of conservation area, even in undergraduate studies and stuff, you learn that like we know things are going extinct before we know what their names are or have anyone's done any kind of Western science on them, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so on the background of that, really great question, Sandra. Tanya, do we have an answer?
We don't. We don't know if any have gone extinct. Of the Christmas beetle species that have been recorded, there are still four that we haven't turned up in the last couple decades. Um, and I said we started off with we found seven of the missing beetles, but these four nobody's seen in ages. So I think those are ones we're keeping our eye on. And again, if we had, in a perfect world, we would go to the places they were last seen and do a formal survey to see if they're still there. But for now, we can't do that. And so again, it's just asking everyone to keep their eyes open. And every Christmas beetle you see, even if it looks like, oh, it's just a normal one, I've seen lots of those, take a picture because
You
you
never know.
never know what you'll turn up. And I'm I'm still hopeful that maybe we'll find them, but it is possible those species are no longer here. And
Yeah.
we really don't know.
So what's limiting our ability to go and have a look? Is it that we don't have the resources, that we don't like, because we know where to go, right? And we know what to look for,
It's
but
100% that we don't have the resources.
we
We
just
don't
don't
have the money.
we don't have the
Yeah.
money to go on the
Yeah.
trip. We can't hire the car, etc., etc. And we don't have like the people's time to go and like spend a week looking for a
Yeah,
beetle.
that's exactly it. Like even for myself, I would happily volunteer to go and look for Christmas beetles, but I can't necessarily afford to take a plane to know the places that we would need to go. And as you said, there needs to be a hire car, we need a place to stay. There's just all these little costs, even though we have in my lab, for example, all the equipment to sample for Christmas beetles pretty effectively. But just those other costs, they add up. And because this isn't funded, it's not part of my core research with my kind of University of Sydney hat on, we just don't have the resources to do this properly. And so, again, it's really frustrating because again, when you think about stuff like how much money goes into koala surveys or platypus surveys, and nothing against those animals are awesome, but we have 36 species here that are unique to Australia. They're just as much a part of our natural heritage as any of those animals. And yet we literally have $0 that's allocated to studying these creatures. And so we're all kind of left. Again, we have a team of volunteers that give up countless hours of their free time to go through every single one of those Christmas beetle sightings to try to identify what they are and put them in the right category. They don't get paid $1 to do that. It's not their main job. They're doing that entirely out of the goodness of their hearts because they care about preserving these animals. But if we had the resources, then we could choose, because we have enough data from the Christmas beetle count now to say, here are the species we are most concerned about. We could then go to those areas, do formal surveys. And if we didn't pick up anything on a formal survey, that would then allow us to start thinking about, well, we can maybe apply for threatened species status. And then
Yeah.
once that legal protection is there, it also opens up more avenues for us to actually do something to try to help those species. Because on top of those four that are missing, there are at least five or six that I would say I have severe concerns for, because based on the Christmas beetle data that we have from the count, they are restricted to a very, very small area. In one case, there's one species that someone turned up that had been missing for decades, but every sighting we've had has been within a 5 kilometer radius of one place. You know, they're clearly very restricted in their distribution. That on its own could, in theory, qualify them as threatened species, but again, you need formal surveys to be able to tip them over, to have enough data to have that formally done so they could get some protections. So that, I think that's large. That's a problem for invertebrate conservation broadly, is that in order to have something declared threatened, you need to have data. And we often don't have that data because we don't have the resources or the funding to get that data. And so these species just disappear. And you know, it's really, yeah, it's frustrating and it's sad. Like I wish we could do more, but we are limited in what we can do.
Yeah. And so like what we talked a little bit about, one of the workarounds here is to try to collect data from people's memories and
Mhm.
stories, because they're not the data Tanya and I are used to working with. They're more the social sciences data, but they are data nonetheless. And that can be convincing, and get us, out there to get the next step. So that's really cool. And there's a survey that we can everyone can then fill in. It's very, very quick, like 5 minutes, where you can tell us your memories of Christmas beetles that can help us to try to piece the story together, piece the historical story together in conjunction with, these amazing resources like Trove and all this great stuff where we can gather media things. But the other thing you can do is, of course, get involved in the Christmas beetle count. We've got lots of questions and I'd like to spend the next 15 minutes ish on how can people get involved. So people are asking, how can schools, particularly, how can schools get involved? How can kindergarten children get involved? How can families get involved? What information could we collect? How can we engage schools? So lots of people, talking about getting children involved. My answer, just before you give an answer, is to say, let's get adults doing this stuff. We're always pinning it on the kids.
They get all the fun.
No, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. But but yeah, I mean, so school's obviously a fantastic place. I don't know about any of you, but my kindy is just about to have her last day tomorrow. My little kindy girl, she is around the playground every day. Like, Mom, we found these Christmas beetles and suckers, and they're all running around. So they're in. I can't give her a smartphone, obviously, because that would. But yeah, so what can we do there? How can we do this
Yeah.
informally, formally, what can teachers do, etc.
Yeah, so I think for school kids, I think the first thing is for them to even know that there's something happening, that Christmas beetles are a thing. Kids
Great.
love learning about insects. And so even showing them pictures and talking about all these really beautiful beetles, keep your eyes open, tell your parents to look for them. I think that's a really good way also to get families involved in looking for Christmas beetles. Um, because for many of us, depending again where you live, but for many of us, Christmas beetles are relatively rare and you may not see one. And that can be kind of, it's hard to tell kids, look for this thing that you're probably not going to find. So, what I would suggest is broaden to beetles, because most parts of the country will have very cool beetles, hanging around. It's just a matter of seeing them. So, looking at flowers, looking in the ground, looking around, and getting kids to start thinking, oh, this is a really cool beetle. What's it doing on that flower? Oh, it's amazing. So I would broaden that out to say, let's do a beetle hunt. Let's go out into our schoolyard and do a beetle bio blitz. We're going to look at all the different types of beetles we can find in our school, and then kind of weave the Christmas beetles into that. Again, depending on the schools, I know different schools have rules around smartphone use. I know my daughter is not allowed to have her smartphone out at all at school. Um, but I don't know whether teachers are able to use those, and if not, maybe collecting photos some other way so that those can be submitted later. It's
Using a camera, like
Yeah,
shot.
a camera. There were these things called cameras back in the before times. That's a possibility as well, or if the teachers are able to take those photos and upload them. iNaturalist does have another version called Seek, I believe it's called, which is sort of the more gamified,
Just
aimed at kids ones. Sorry?
Emma just mentioned it just
Oh,
then.
yes.
Same time you said it.
Yeah, so Seek is aimed more at kids and it has more, I think, more safety features, but it's also more gamified. So it's a bit more like Pokemon, where you can, there's a leaderboard and things. So maybe using that is a possibility. For those of you that have slightly older kids, like high school aged kids, there is something called the adolescent dip, which is kind of well known in sort of social ecology stuff, where right around the age of 12, kids start to become less engaged with nature. So you get little kids who are super excited. Around 12, 13, we start to lose them. Um, One of the things that we can do is just build that nature stuff into their lives. So with my daughter's 12 and she has a smartphone because she started high school, and we agreed that it's good for her to have that. One of the rules we put in place is that in order to keep her phone, she needs to submit 10 sightings to iNaturalist every month. This is a terms and conditions of her using a smartphone.
Oh my God.
And so, she's a teenager, so she's a bit like, mom. But she does get really into it when we go out to look for stuff. So you have to get them past that like teenager phase. But they often get pretty into it, especially when they can compete with friends and see, that they've made some cool discoveries. So I think it's just for older kids, it's really just keeping them from disengaging with nature as best you can, however you can. And for younger ones, it's kind of getting them out there just looking for critters, looking for insects broadly and saying this would be really cool if we see a Christmas beetle that's super exciting. I think kids feed off of the people around them. So if you're excited, they will be excited. Um, so just trying to keep that energy up for them is
Yeah.
it's a great.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, so great having other parents in science to just be like, yeah, this is these are the obvious rules. Um, Are we gonna, so, we talk a lot at Invertebrates Australia about working on like formal school programs and things
Mhm.
like that, because obviously, one of the things we would love to do as we get bigger, we've only been around for 3 years. We've only recently received our DGR status, meaning that our donations through Invertebrates Australia are tax deductible. But as we grow, one of the things we'd love to do is, work on formal nationwide curricular programs and things like that. So if people are keen to help and to collaborate on those sorts of things, we're definitely interested in chatting further. We love collaborating. I've also popped in to hopefully everyone can see it. It says I'm sending it to everyone. So Pat put a couple of links in. One thing we didn't mention is the Christmas Beetle ID app, and I just wanted to quickly say that exists, and I've given you a link to the Australian Museum website where you can learn about that and you can download it for figuring out how to identify different species. And a quick one on that is that someone asked how important is it that we get all of the different aspects, and I think it's really about get whatever you can, but the different and upload whatever you can, right? But the different views help you to get further down the ID, is that right?
Yeah, there's a few species that look very similar from the top down, and the way we tell them apart is either by looking at the underside or the rear end. Often the rear is very different, and that can help us, distinguish between them. So if you can get photos, particularly of the underside and the rear, that's really useful because that gives us a bit more information. The face view, so straight on, is also helpful because sometimes the specific shape of that duckbill gives us a little bit more information. But of course, get whatever you can. You'll notice if you've already uploaded sightings, some of them will just stay at Anoplognathus, so they'll stay at the genus level. That happens when we're not confident enough to go beyond that level. We know it's a Christmas beetle. We're not 100% sure what species it is. And we're very careful to try not to go to species level if we're not sure. So if yours is kicking around Anoplognathus, that's probably why. We do go back and kind of keep checking them in case, maybe I can't tell the part, but one of our volunteers is better at them than I am, better at IDs. So, it just depends who's looking at it. Um, but yeah, as many different views as you can is really helpful. I did see there was a question in about what to do about Christmas beetles high up in the tree.
Good one.
I don't know if I have an answer. I think if they're too far away for us to really see that they're even Christmas beetles on the photo, unfortunately, we probably can't use that. But have a look at the bottom because again, they are very clumsy. So they
Yeah.
often will just fall out of the tree, and then you can kind of get one to get a few pictures of it if possible. But yeah, it's very tricky when they're very high up and you can see them, but you can't quite get a picture of them.
Yeah, definitely. Um, there's a question for me that hasn't been asked that I feel like we get asked a lot. And I just wanted to address that in case folks are maybe thinking it, but I haven't asked it. And that is, we get a lot of questions about how to actually do the uploading onto iNaturalist. And I just wanted to, I'm just going to share a link. I'm sharing a bunch of different links in the chat. One of which, yeah, is a link to our YouTube channel, if that's a thing that the kids have these days. We don't have a MySpace account. The which where Tanya has put together some awesome little how-to videos. So yeah, but if anyone has any specific questions about that, if you've still got a few minutes, please don't be shy in jumping in and asking. It's, we understand that everybody's at a different level of nerdism in terms of understanding the ins and outs of iNaturalist. That's not a problem. I'll just grab the YouTube video, the YouTube link now as well.
Yeah, and just a reminder to everyone, you don't have to, we have a Christmas Beetle project that you can join, and that gives you that we'll have updates and things as the year goes through about what's going on and what we're finding. But you don't actually have to join the project to contribute sightings. As soon as you upload a beetle that is tagged as Anoplognathus, which the algorithm will do automatically, it automatically gets sucked into our project. So even if you just upload a Christmas Beetle and you've never heard of the Christmas Beetle account, it still gets included. That's one of the things that makes it really powerful, is that we eventually get every Christmas Beetle sighting that anyone puts up, ends up there. And again, if you find something and you're not sure it's a Christmas Beetle, still submit it, because even if it's not, that's still important data. Even if it ends up being some other type of, interesting beetle. Oh,
Yeah.
and for those using the app, so the Christmas Beetle identification app is really great. You can kind of go through it on your phone. I would say don't get too hung up on the colors, because I have found the colors can be a bit misleading. And that's partly because Christmas beetles are variable in their color. So they may generally, one species might generally be a tawny brown, but it can vary a little bit in how brown it is or in the particular coloration. So try not to get too hung up on color, because that can end up putting you in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
For those people that have a bit more familiarity with insects in general and using entomological keys, there is a lucid key for Christmas beetles now. And I mean, without getting into the weeds too much, lucid keys kind of allow you to choose the characteristics that you see, and then it'll kind of narrow that list down. It is difficult to use if you're not familiar with sort of entomological language, because they do use very anatomical terms. But having said that, if you want to learn, I mean, now's the best time, because you can Google words and it'll tell you what it is. You can ask ChatGPT, what is a pronotum and where do I find it? So there's ways, if you're really interested in learning, you can definitely do it. But yeah, that's just a warning. Don't feel bad if it's a bit of a struggle. It's even a struggle for me, some of the terms on there. So
Yeah, I have no idea. I work with behavior. I don't know anything. So, I did just want to mention as well that you know, partners right from the start in this, and the Christmas Beetles and Invertebrates Australia generally, have been Egg Picnic, who are these incredible artists that now based in Canberra. And they have prints of Christmas beetles that you can buy. I don't know if, I'm not going to guarantee that they're going to ship them for you before Christmas. You should ask them that. But yeah, jump onto Egg Picnic's website and buy yourself a whole bunch of cool prints, and they got cool t-shirts. I mean, a lot of their stuff has vertebrates on them, but it's still worth going to their website to check out the coolness. All right, I think the only question left is someone wants to know where you got your shirt, Tanya, which is
It's from Redbubble. I have a variety of nerdy shirts from there. If you like getting insect patterns, they've got you covered. Um, there's a question about uploading older photos
yes.
pre-smartphones. That's a really good one, and I don't know. I mean, go ahead and upload it and see what happens. I think if it's yeah, I don't know when you were little. So if you were little and it was a DSLR, DSLRs I think still have the metadata that's embedded in the file. So those would still be good. If it's pre-DSLRs, then I imagine that data won't be in there, but I think you can manually put in location data. I would just ask that in the notes, just specify that um, the location is based on my memory, not
Right.
not taken from the photo itself, just so that we know. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
you've got like printed out photos like from like when paper was a thing, and then you take a photo of that photo and upload that either via the website or via your phone to iNaturalist. Yeah, you can put stuff in manually, but it would be great in the like the notes section if you it would be, oh my God, it'd be a job, but yeah.
Yeah, because I guess if you take it with your smartphone, the problem there is that iNaturalist will use
You'll
the
try
metadata
and
from that
yeah,
photo, so it'll think it was taken wherever you took the photo of the photo.
you
So
have
you would
to.
have to kind of do a little bit more work to go in there and change the coordinates, which is a little tricky. Um, yeah,
But not impossible. I think
not impossible,
a lot of,
doable.
yeah, there's a lot of like retired entomologists who have a lot of images like that, because obviously that was the technology that was available,
Mhm.
and they are working on trying to digitize their photographic records, using like going back to field notebooks and looking at latitudes, and all that kind of stuff, which is a huge amount of work, but makes the data available in ways that is otherwise completely unavailable to
Yeah,
science. I mean, and like if no one knows that it exists, so it is a really valuable thing to do, and old information from the past is incredibly valuable, like worth far more than just the equivalent photo from today. So it is incredibly valuable, but it might cost a little bit of time.
yeah.
Um, yeah, but if you do have like, if you've got like time series of Christmas beetles on your holidays from like, I mean, one of the things we know about bogong moths is from a family who used to go on holidays to Mount Buffalo and count moths like for a couple of decades. And so this is like the only data we have from the 50s and stuff. So you never know, you might be sitting on a gold mine. All right. We need to wrap up. We've just got 1 minute left. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. I've popped a lot of links in the chat about all the different ways that you can get involved, but please, you know, spend some time on the Invertebrates Australia website and have a look at all the Christmas beetle stuff going on there. Get into the iNaturalist community and yeah, get photos of your Christmas beetles. Have a lovely break, everybody. Have a wonderful summer, and yeah, and enjoy being outside with the critters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.